So today is to talk about Be a Good Ancestor. I have been a professional genealogist for almost 15 years now. My third or fourth career I'm working on. Consummate volunteer, that's the underlying one for all my careers. So I enjoy doing my research on my own family. I learned very quickly that I don't so much enjoy doing research on other people's families. And that is predominantly, I had a really good experience. The first person who hired me, I gave him back a big thick notebook that he gave his mom for her like 85th birthday or something. And then he asked me to do the other side of his family, and it was like, well, here's 25 places I looked and found nothing. And oh, by the way, here's the bill. And my stomach just didn't like that combination, so I was like, yeah, I think I'll give that up. And I will concentrate on presentations and writing. I've written about 7 or 8, maybe even a little more than that, books about my family and my husband's family, with many more to go. And I did have one client who gave me 3 boxes of research that I turned into a 200-page family history book for him to share with his relatives. So, and I do occasional articles and things for journals because it's always fun to write up some of the stuff that you encounter and you're doing your genealogical research. I wish I could say these are my ancestors, but they're not my known ancestors. I won't say I'm not related to them somehow, but that would imply that I also know who they are, and I don't. So how about you? How many of you I assume you're in a genealogy club, you've probably started doing some research, at least know your parents' and your grandparents' names? That's a good start. So as you research, right, and depending on how you got started, if you went to certainly a Genealogy 101 class from 30 years ago or something, you know, they would have said to you, oh, you know, start with yourself, right? Make sure you have your birth certificate, marriage certificate if it applies. I usually add to that list, like, don't forget the newspapers, get your birth announcement, your engagement announcement, your wedding announcement. We know you're not going to get your own death information because that's a little beyond. Even AI, I don't think, can do that for you, right? But you can get these things for yourself, and then, of course, in the class, they would say, oh, well, once you have all those, now go backwards and get those for your parents, right? And maybe you can add death certificates, depending on your situation, for your parents. And then go backwards, generation by generation, and, of course, each generation gets to be twice as many people. Well, that's fine. And if you're only looking to collect names and dates, then that's a great pattern. Keep going, and you know, you can be like one of the guys at NEHGS who just has names and dates that would go almost all the way around this room. But that's all he's interested in, are the names and the dates. So my question to you is, what are you interested in learning? Or what have you learned? Because most of us, as we start doing research, right, we also learn there's all these other things I can find out about. I can find out about military, I can find out about education, different aspects of their lives that turn it more into a story, right? And if we're bringing back dead ancestors, we kind of want to bring them all the way back to life, at least I do. So what is it that you want to know about your ancestors? Interactive time. There's not enough of you. Just shout out what you want to, what do you want to find out? When you found that new great-grandparent or grandparent or whatever, what did you want to know about them?
Who they were, what they did.
What they did, okay.
What kind of people they were?
All right, let's get a little more specific. Anybody? Yeah?
Yeah, I have a great-grandfather who worked for the Union Pacific Railroad, building it out in Cheyenne. And after his wife died, he brought his 4 kids back east, put them with relatives. He went back out west, and nobody ever heard from him again. Yeah. Family lore is that he then went to Mexico, working, building railroads, and died of yellow fever, but I have nothing to substantiate any of that except family lore.
So you learned about migrations, you learned about occupations.
Yeah.
That kind of brings a person to life, right? If you know what they did for work. Well, not my father. He sat at a desk. He was an accountant. He sat at a desk and crunched numbers for 50 years, you know, like not real exciting. Like I'd rather have somebody who built a railroad and I can go learn things, right? So maybe these things kind of apply to what you want to learn. Who were their neighbors? Where did they live? What kind of hobbies did they have, right? Or what kind of activities did they engage in? What relatives did they know about? Who did they live with for relatives? Who did they visit with? Where did they go to school? Or did they have an occupation that was more of a trade and they did an apprenticeship with somebody? These are all pieces that add to their stories, right? Usually we have to figure out what religion they practice because there's those church records that, you know, we need in case we don't find the birth, marriage, and death. We can at least maybe go to the church and find something, right? So my question to you, how much of this have you documented of your own life?
Zip.
Yeah, I know. Well, I did write about a quarter of my autobiography, but it's nowhere near finished. Problem with writing an autobiography is you have to figure out when to stop because, you know, you're still alive. It's like you can't write and go all the way to death because, again, we don't know when that's happening, right? So my challenge to you today and the handouts I gave you are to start writing some of these things down. And I want to make it as easy as possible for you. That's why I gave you a little handout that's really just 6 half pages. They're all folded. And we'll talk about just little things you can write down. And I'll give you loads of gold stars for every page you fill in and everything. Because someday, right, your descendants, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, however many generations the genealogy has already skipped in your family, they're going to be researching you. And wouldn't you like to know what they're going to find? Well, I know what they're going to find. They're going to find that you paid your taxes and that you were on all the census reports and that you were a good person because you did all the things you were supposed to do. But what are they going to find to tell them about all these other interesting parts of your life? I know you think they're all boring. I get up, I go to work, I come home, I eat dinner, I watch TV, I go to bed. Yeah, I know it sounds boring when you say it like that, but you forget to put in like, oh, but twice a week I go do this or I do that, I have a dog, you know, whatever. All those things become important. You'd be surprised how interested people are. The English research site findmypast.com, they have a really big section on the dog licenses that were given to people. And it's one of their most popular things to look up and to find out, like, did my ancestor have a license for their pets? Again, it's just something that makes you feel more human, right? If you can say, oh, I knew they had such and such kind of a dog or whatever. So anyway, your descendants are going to want to know these things. They're going to probably want to know more detail than you want to tell them, and that's okay. You can let them figure out the details or go research the details. But let's take the workbook that I've given you. It's 4 sheets of paper. They're folded in half. But that means there's a cover and a back cover, so those don't count. So it's really only 6 pages to fill out. And they're tiny pages, right? And you can fill them out in paper. You can fill them out on the computer or whatever works for you, right? But where did you live? I met somebody at one of my classes. She's like, yeah, I'm on my 13th house that I've owned. I'm like, well, that's a whole picture calendar at Christmas for your grandchildren. All the places that grandma has lived. Pictures of each of the houses, one every month. I mean, how can you go wrong? That's CVS. Aren't they always advertising? Bring your pictures, make a calendar. That's easy. But where have you lived? Wouldn't you like to have that about your grandfather? Where did he live? You know, you lost track of him. Maybe it's because he has a common name. Maybe it's just that we haven't found the right record set to look in. But, you know, especially if you've got that common name, how are they going to know that it's you who moved out west and came back home or, you know, moved 4 states away or whatever? This is not supposed to tax your memory. This is just like, yeah, okay, I could put all this down. It's not a big deal, right? Where'd you work? No, I don't care if you include every summer job. I don't really expect you to include every little babysitting thing, but those are interesting too, especially if anything interesting ever happened while you were babysitting. But different places that you worked, because you never know what that's going to tell somebody, right? And if you know where one of your ancestors worked, don't hesitate to research that company. What did they do? How big were they back then? Where were they located? Were they growing? Did they build more buildings? You'd be surprised what you can learn. And if it's an existing company, write them a letter. Address it to the company and say, "Attention, historian." Believe it or not, most companies have somebody who's designated as the historian. And you can ask them questions, and you can ask for pictures and information about what the company was like when so-and-so worked there. And if they're a really nice historian, they might even go through the archives and send you some things. Unfortunately, most of my ancestors worked at hospitals, so I usually get the first response, "I can't provide this because of HIPAA." I'm like, no, I want their employment information. HIPAA does not cover employment information. Please, we're not getting that quite that detailed here. Where'd you go to school? All right. Schooling has changed a lot over the years. Some of you are a lot younger than I am, but it's still changed a lot, What if you were still in school at the pandemic? How did you handle that? These are all little tidbits that we would love to have had from our ancestors, so let's provide them to our descendants. Did you take a DNA test? What kind of results did you get? Were you surprised? Are you the guy in the Ancestry commercial that thought he was German and turned out to be Scottish, or whichever way it went? I don't know. I just think that's hysterical. And, are you leaving access to your DNA results to somebody? Do they need to have your login information? I'm not necessarily encouraging you that you write down the passwords and things, but you might want to at least tell them what site it's at and, who at least you think had, at some point, had access to them. Maybe they'll have passed it down because, boy, talk about a family heirloom. You can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't see it, but I'll take the DNA over the family Bible, because at least the DNA, I know it's 100% true for that one person, right? So, write your DNA story. What was the ethnicity that you celebrated as a kid? Did you do it because that's what your parents told you you were, or did you do it because everybody in the neighborhood was Irish and therefore you just grew up being fake Irish, because everybody else celebrated and ate Irish food, you family did too, or whatever. Any of those kind of things. Write down a quick pedigree. Think about this now. If it's your grandchildren or great-grandchildren that are looking for this information, just providing them with 2 generations is a lot of information for them. If it's your grandchildren, they've already got 3 generations to get to you. If it's your great-grandchildren, they've got 4, so that's 5, 6 generations. Well, that's what they need to be looking at DNA and everything, so you just gave them a whole bucket full of information. And all you had to do was write down 6 names. I told you I'm making this easy. Easy, easy peasy. But you have to share, if you have the information, you have to share it, or who knows where they're going to find it, right? The same books, the same websites are not going to be in existence 20 or 30 years from now. We can pretty much guarantee some of that. How about your family group? Do you have brothers and sisters that you want your descendants to know about? Do your parents have brothers and sisters? Did your grandparents have brothers and sisters? Especially if you've got that nasty name change in there that, you've already figured it all out. At least give them a hint. You don't have to tell them the whole story. You don't have to embarrass anybody, especially if they're still alive. I know that, there are things you don't want to write about when the people are still alive, because you never know how they're going to react. And I have found my mother's biological father, but she wants nothing to do with it, because, no, the man on my birth certificate, that's my father. That's the name I used all my life. Well, yeah, until 70 years ago when you got married. You know, she's 92 now. I mean, she didn't exactly use the name all her life. Kind of far from it. But she doesn't want to hear anything about it. So, okay, I just don't tell her. I don't know. My grandmother was a bit of a floozy, I've decided. I'll learn more when I finally get to researching her family. But if you...
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, but if you know it, you know, just share the little pieces that are going to help somebody else, right? Don't you wish your grandparents had done all this for you? Oh my gosh, life would be so much easier. I'm working on, well, I'm trying to get written up my Swedish line. Asked my father one time, well, what did your grandmother tell you about her? I don't know, I never asked her. She didn't speak English. I mean, 101 reasons why, even though she lived like visually within his house, from his house, she could look at her house. Nope, never asked her, never talked to her, didn't know she had 7 sisters and brothers. Knew she was a twin, but that was all he knew. Had no idea there were 6 or 7 brothers and sisters left home in Sweden. I'm like, how could you not have asked her? I want to pull this stuff out. So another way to attach this or attack this, if you don't want to do a little booklet kind of thing, is write out as if you were writing your job application or answering an application or writing out your resume. Some of you look like you probably are those good people that update your resume every couple of years, you know, like I never did that. I started working at home 25 years ago, and there goes the resume, like nobody needs it anymore. So a resume has addresses. It has your work history. It has, so work history would be what your occupation was, hopefully. It has your educational background, right? Because the employer kind of wants to know that. It has information possibly about activities that you do. I know my son got a job interview because he listed, of course this was when he was still in college, and he needed everything he could find to fill up the page. He listed that he was on the Frisbee team. So somebody gave him an interview because the company had a Frisbee team, and they thought, well, maybe you would join the team. Like, hey, whatever gets you in the door, you know? References, aren't the references some type of a friend? I mean, they may not be the best friend that you're going to share your diary with, but they're some kind of a friend. They're known acquaintances anyway. Certainly for women, a job application or a resume, we usually have to put down other names we've been known by, right? Because they want the maiden name. Okay, well, maiden names, nicknames, I don't care. I would just want to know all the names I need to look you up by. So it's not going to help with everything, right? I don't know too many people that put their religion and their neighbors on their resumes and whatever, but you never know. They could fit in some categories. So I started filling out my resume. There's a template in Microsoft Word, right? If you just go under templates, there's one that says resume, and it just gives you all the categories. You can throw away what you don't want and fill in the rest of them. So I started filling it out, and I said, okay, I want to be the ancestor that you love. Because I'm convinced that the ancestor you love is the one you know the most about, right? It's very hard to love someone when all you know is their name and their dates of birth and death, or worse yet, the years that they were born and died, and nothing else. It's kind of hard to get to know them. So I want to be the one you love. So I'm going to tell you all this information about me. And of course, this is public, so I'm going to hide some of it, but but I'm going to put in there, you know, okay, yes, I did a job as a data entry clerk. I got the job because I could type. Real unique skill, but you know, I had to type on a computer terminal. I should draw a picture and put it in there, not anything like what we use today. It was actually a standalone thing that you sat down and you typed, and the paper came out the back like a typewriter, except somewhere it was connected to the computer. Where did I go to school? I can fill in some references. That's kind of standard resume type stuff, right? And then I put in and said, well, I want all these other categories. So I put in, okay, here's my birth date, here's my wedding date, and who I was born to, who I was married to, right? This still is going to fit on a couple sheets of paper, even when I ever finish it. All the places that I lived, Notice I put down, well, I know I lived in Springfield, but I couldn't remember the address. I now have the address. I have looked it up. But, you know, I at least put down that, yes, I did live in that town, city, whatever you want to call Springfield, Massachusetts. I drove by the place I lived. It looks nothing like when I lived there, so I don't know what good it is to know that I lived there, but God forbid I was there on a census year, at least they would know. Where did I work? Again, repeated education. I went to St. Michael's in Litchfield when I was a kid. Some hobbies. Simple little things that I can put down. I don't have to put a lot of words, but I got some facts down there for people to look at. Okay, so if you want to stop here, you're still going to get gold stars, treasure chest full of gold if you want. You just provided a whole lot of information for your descendants, right? All you have to do now is hope that they know where to find it. That's a little trickier, but again, we can't predict the future, so we do what we can to multiply it and make sure people have copies, whatever, make sure that they can get a hold of it. All right. But you've made a great stride. You've provided a lot of information. Now, if you want to go a little further, by the way, I have decided that my autobiography stops at age 65. I figure that's about when I'm just going to say, like, hey, no, I hit old lady age, I'm stopping, I'm not telling you. Because the rest of it's going to be all downhill, right? I'm going to stop right there. But you can take what you just wrote, whether it's a page or 2 or 5 or 6, whatever, you can add in photographs, you can talk about family members, you can add stories. You can keep enhancing this as you have the time, as you have the memory that comes back. You know, so think about little things that you might write up that would be important for people to know. Certainly, if you have a lot of medical information that, you know, is hereditary type stuff, genetic things, maybe you should write that up so down the road they will know, oh yeah, he had this disease, and back then they called it X, but of course by the time somebody's reading it, they'll call it YZ23K or something, who knows. And if you're going to write stories, make sure you put some emotion into them. Don't make them 100% facts. I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. So I added in a photograph. This is the dormitory I lived at for 4 years in college. The picture was taken way after I graduated college, but it was still there, so I went down, I took a picture of it. It's just to kind of give you a little more feel for, you know, where did I live, right? I could take a picture of my parents' house. They still live there after 70-something years they've been there. I think I have enough pictures. I don't know that I had it on the screen long enough for you to notice, but I had a job as a scab. Well, first of all, some of you might be going like, what's a scab? So there's a question to answer right there. The scab is the person who works and crosses the picket line during a strike. College kids will do anything for money in the summer. So I started to write, you know, a little story that goes along with it. I had a second shift job right before I was going to start. It was the company my father worked for. I had worked for them for 2 or 3 summers already. Right before summer vacation, the union went on strike. And they're like, well, you can still come and work, but only until the strike is over. Because they were definitely afraid that if the strike ended after 3 weeks or whatever, they would take things out on me for having worked, right? And they were trying to protect me, which was okay, but it didn't leave me too comfortable, because if I lost my job after 2 or 3 weeks, I had to go find another one, and summer vacation's only so long. But I got the job. They were on strike the entire summer, so it worked out great for me. Some people will say it worked out even better because that's where I met my husband, because he was also a scab. So, you know, little things happen. But, you know, explaining any of these jobs, what exactly did that mean? Go for it. It doesn't take long to write 2 or 3 sentences that explain something, especially if it's a term that you know people aren't going to understand. I have another one where it's not in this set of slides, but I talk about my sister and I are born 2 weeks and 2 days and 2 years apart. We used to have huge birthday parties during April school vacation, right up until I decided I was too old to have all those little kids at my birthday party. She had to have her own party. Then she got these really cool parties. My mother and I were just having a big discussion about this, but she had a hobo party one year. Now, hobo is another word you've got to explain, like what was a hobo, right? The best I can do is say, well, it's kind of like today's homeless people, except for they rode around by train. But everybody, all the kids loved coming to the hobo party because they didn't have to put on party clothes. They were told to come and look dirty, like a hobo. So they didn't have to put on pretty dresses and whatever. They could, you know, and got to run around the yard, whatever. It was fun. But again, terms that people don't understand these days because they've gone out of use. So I added a little bit. Yes, this is my dormitory. It's shaped like an X. And I was here during the blizzard of '78. How long do you think it's going to be before the stories of the blizzard of '78 get taken off the weather reports in the winter? Like, it comes up almost every year, doesn't it? So I added in, this is where I was during the blizzard. I was not in a house that had snow that I had to jump out the second story window. I did live on the second floor. I could have probably jumped out. And then I went a little further and I said, well, not only was I here, but that was the year my work study was the switchboard. Now that was great. Talk about a babysitting job. You worked the switchboard at night and on the weekends. Who calls college on the weekend? Like for the, you know, for the administration staff, right? It was getting paid to do your homework. It was wonderful. Well, who couldn't work during the blizzard? All the normal daytime operators. Well, I shouldn't say all, there were only 2. But they couldn't come in, right? Anytime that you're going to hear about the blizzard, you're going to hear about, oh, people stayed home from work for weeks because they couldn't get out, they couldn't go here, they couldn't go there. I made more money those couple of weeks. But I didn't talk about that here. What I talked about here, because I did want to draw in on the census, was the census, not the census. I had to walk across the street, bundled up like an Eskimo, with like 10-foot snowbanks on either side of me. Did you just get chills when I talked about 10-foot snowbanks and being bundled like an Eskimo? I'm trying to pull in so that you can kind of feel the same thing that I felt back then, right? Like, it was cold. I had to put on layers and layers of clothes to walk across the street and then take them all off and sit there and do nothing because nobody was calling because nobody could do anything, right? But in case there was an emergency, you had to have the phone covered. So pull those kind of things in, use terms that are going to make people understand what was going on. You know, if you rushed home from practice and you had to eat dinner before you had to go to the next thing, you know, don't just say I ate my dinner. I gobbled my dinner. Isn't that different? Gobbling it instead of eating it. I didn't enjoy it probably because I gobbled it so fast. Maybe your mom told you that you just inhaled your dinner. I used to tell my boys that all the time. Would you stop inhaling your dinner? Like, I worked hard on this, enjoy it, you know? So again, just think of other terms, even if it's just going back months or weeks later, years later, and editing your story. You might come up with other terms that make it feel more realistic for you. All right, so if you start writing stories and you talk about relatives, make sure you identify whether they're real people in your family tree or they're those fake relatives that because we grew up with respect for our elders, everybody was called aunt and uncle, whether they were related to you or not. I read a letter that my uncle wrote home from World War II, and he's like, oh, Grandpa Scott. I'm like, he didn't have a Grandpa Scott. Like, who is this person? Luckily, between my father, my uncle, and their 2 wives, somebody could tell me, oh, Uncle Scott was the father of Grandma's best friend. Well, of course, you're not, instead of calling him Mr. as a kid, you're going to come up with a term. So they chose to call him Grandpa. I'm like, okay, well, that clears it up, but I got to put that in the notes. You know, who was this Grandpa Scott? You know, I'm sure I'm not alone in having cousins that aren't really cousins and aunts and uncles that aren't really aunts and uncles, but if you've always called them that, that's probably how you're going to write about them in a story. We have a set, my aunt's parents, I used to call them aunt and uncle, but my sister always called them Mr. and Mrs. It's like I look back at thank you notes and things we wrote, and I'm always like Aunt Hazel and Uncle Charlie, and she's always like Mr. and Mrs. Hill. And I'm like, well, I don't know, I guess maybe she respected them more, but I was more friendly. I don't know what the difference, but it's like really weird because we hardly ever saw them without both of us being there. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for other things to write about, don't forget to write about all the history that you've lived through. You know, maybe you weren't here for when JFK got shot. I was like 5, so I don't really remember too much about it.
I was in college.
But the man on the moon, or the, you know, the Challenger explosion, some of the crazy stuff that's going on now in politics, any of those kind of things that might come up 50 years from now on the news. You know, 50 years ago today used to be when such and such happened or whatever. Write down what you remember about it. It's easy to research a historic event and get headlines. Headlines are very deceiving because they make it look like everybody in America had the same feelings and the same reactions, right? If we take one of the fairly more recent ones and we go back to 9/11, right? My reactions as a mother of young children were very different than some people that had, you know, family members that they were concerned about, or, you know, lived in California and maybe didn't even ever come to the East Coast to know these places that were getting destroyed. So let's not let everybody think that, oh yeah, the whole entire country, you know, melted into a sob bucket at the same time or anything. You know, give them what it was for your family. How did your family react? I remember my kids came home from school that day and they're like, oh yeah, we've been watching it all day on TV, and I was furious. How could they let these teenagers watch this all day without knowing who might have relatives in New York or, you know, whatever? I was like, no, this was not acceptable. Not that I could have done a thing about it, but that was my initial reaction to them having seen it. I'd have to go back and figure out. I guess my oldest was in like 6th or 7th grade, no, 8th grade that year. That's right, because 3 days later we had our own family issues with his friends. So, you know, 8th grade is what, like 13 years old, so my twins were 10. No, they didn't need to be watching it all day long at school. Like, come up with something to do. So any of these kind of things, you know, write down what you were doing so they get a more personal feel than what the magazines and the newspapers are going to be saying about it. I'm sure that we could all probably write some interesting stories about what we did when we lost power. And they'd be way different than what kids do today. Whine and complain that I can't see my iPad and I can't watch YouTube and I can't this and I can't that. And it's like, yeah, so take out a deck of cards. You know, all the things that we used to do. I remember one power outage where my kids got so excited because we put a blanket in the foyer because it was the only area in our house that kind of had 4 walls. So a couple flashlights would light it up pretty well, and we sat on the floor, played a board game by candles or flashlights or whatever, because we didn't know what else to do. But it was a nice family thing that we actually were in the same place doing something together. So all kinds of things that you can write about, and most of them, you'll get a memory jog if you're watching the news or you're, you know, reading a news feed that says 50 years ago, 25 years ago today, or whatever, those kind of things. All right, how about the changes in your own family? How did you react when that new baby was born, or the older sibling got married and moved out of the house? Now, these all depend on what your age ranges were. Certainly if you're one of these, who was I talking to? Somebody yesterday that was like, oh yeah, my grandfather had like 12 children and he was the youngest. Well, I'm sure as the youngest of 12, he had a whole different childhood than the oldest of 12. You know, so if you've got ranges like that, you did experience things where, oh my God, my older sister or sibling moved out of the house before I was even 5. Like, do you even have a relationship at that point, you know? So all these kind of things can affect how you reacted to your life, and they're all interesting parts that are going to also give hints about other people's lives, you know, that touched yours. And then, of course, there's those mementos in your house. I've been saying lately, I have a picture over the stairway. I guarantee if my kids were to clean the house, they'd probably look at each other, the 3 of them, and go, who's this picture of? I don't think they've ever asked me, but it's me when I was 2. So it's not like the one where you're looking at and going, oh, it's a really old picture, it must be an old relative. Sometimes that gets people going on genealogy, you know, like we got to figure out who this guy is that's been hanging on mom's wall for all these years, right? So if you have something and you haven't had time to discuss with your family, or you haven't asked your parents, it's never too late to ask your parents questions, besides the one that says, can you babysit? You know, that's a given, but, you know, ask the other questions. Look around at what you have and write a story about who gave it to you. Why is it important to you? If you have preferences, write down at the end of the story who you want to inherit it when you don't have it anymore. I have this pair of ceramic horse heads. They're over the door that goes to the garage, you know, from the family room to the garage, right? That's where my kids, 3 boys, that's where they played Nerf basketball for years. I don't think they even know those horse heads are up there, even though they stared at that door for days at a time. When we finally took them down to paint the room, 6 years ago or whatever, I put a sticker on the back and I said, these came from my grandmother. I like them because she and I had a connection over horses. I don't know, I swear, they'll get 50 cents a piece at a tag sale instead of 25, or at least they'll ask for 50 instead of 25 because they know they were important to me, right? None of them have a big love of horses. Maybe my grandkids, now that I have some of those, maybe they'll want them, but you know, it's just a way to let them know, I never got to tell you the story about this, but here it is. And this is why I liked these for all these years, and they've hung in our house for 40-something years now. Somebody's got to know. Again, if you've done the DNA testing, write down why you did it. Where did you do it? What results did you get? How did you react when you got your first results? I have had mine at all 4 of these different companies. Way back when, I made this little chart that shows how different the answers were from each company. I also, if I really felt like it, I have all the updates from Ancestry. I could just go in and show, like, over time how the Ancestry ones have changed, because I think now Ancestry has me down to 28% Scandinavian or something. I mean, the 53 was like a big deal for me because I thought that was going to answer a question. 28 is about right. So don't forget to do this part, because this might be the one thing that your grandkids can relate to, you know, the science part of it, right? It might be a lot more popular in 30 or 40 years than it is today even. Who knows? I can't predict the future. I can try. So start slow. Start with your little booklet, your 6 little pages to fill out, right? It doesn't have to be a big deal. Write down other things as they come to you, because once you get started, you'll be like, oh, and maybe I have this book I could go look in, you know, an old appointment book, calendar. I finally went through all the crap I brought home from when my office closed and they laid me off. Oh my God, there was 12 books of appointment books in there, and I can go through and see, oh, that's when I took a day off to take the kids to the doctor, or we went and did this. It's all written in there. I never kept it in a diary, but it was in my book at work, so I have all the information, right? Let your family know that you're at least working on it. You don't have to share it right away, but if they don't know you've done it, they won't know to look for it. And or they won't know to ask you questions. Mom, have you thought about this? I'm spending a lot more time with my mother now, so I'm asking more questions because we've run out of things to talk about. I see her once a week. It's like not much happens in between those weeks. I got to come up with things to ask her about. Take a photo with you. This is my time of the year to promote this. Take a photo to Thanksgiving dinner and start a conversation by saying, does anybody remember this party? Does anybody know who's in this picture? Can you name these people? Isn't that much more fun than talking about your medical issues and the weather? Like, I'm tired of hearing about grandma's achy feet or, whatever. Like, let's talk about something fun. So get them involved. Have them help you especially with pictures, because depending on your age, you and your siblings may remember very different relatives, and you may recognize them in photographs much more easily than others. Whoops, wrong direction. So treat this project as special. Have it in a special notebook if you're going to do something more extensive than the 6 pages, a special 3-ring binder. Make it stand out among your belongings, because when somebody finds it, when they're going to clean out your house, whenever that might be, you want them to know that it's something special and it's not just, oh, we'll put it in the recycle pile. Empty the notebook, it all goes in recycle, and the notebook goes in the trash. No. We don't want that happening to your stuff. If you do protect it on your computer, don't forget to leave the password somewhere so somebody can get into the file, because if you've protected any kind of, certainly at least I know for sure, any kind of Microsoft Office document, there is no way to find out the password once you forget it. So you do want to remember what it is somewhere. Maybe even a special storage box. Well, I used to get them at Joann's, or not Joann's, AC Moore, but they're gone now. But you can get pretty floral boxes and things like that will hold your mementos or whatever. People are less likely to throw away a pretty box than they are a brown box, right? If it's a brown box with an Amazon smile on it, yep, mom saved some trash. There it goes, so if you make it look pretty and special, people will treat it that way. And your memories are special. So like I said, I know you're all good ancestors already. You've followed the rules, you've done your taxes, you've documented what you can. That generates all the government documents that we love to search for. You're on the census reports and all that kind of thing. If you were in the military, you did your documents, all that kinds of stuff. If you're a genealogist, you probably are better than me, and you label your photos, so somebody else will know who's in them. It's always nice. Maybe you've recorded your voice. I tried this one year with my son, who is like John and does all this video stuff, and I said, could you just bring your camera and go around the room at Christmas? There were usually 12 to 15 of us. I said, just have everybody say their name, and maybe just say like a quick hello, or how you're related to the hostess or something. Just quick and easy. Because there's nothing like what happens when you miss somebody's voice that you've heard all the time, and all of a sudden it's not there. We have the ability to save that. Not everybody wants to be on videotape, but even a microphone, with an old-fashioned tape recorder works. Make the job application for your favorite ancestor. Make your resume that says, hey, this was my life. And maybe it's not all the details, but it's a good starting point for somebody. Add your stories if you're so inclined, and leave information about your personality. My mother's working on leaving her personality, because she's now repainted every room in the house a shade of blue. She's like, I don't care if somebody ever walks in my house and says I hate blue, because they don't live here and I do, so everything is blue and white. The entire house now. For the first time in the 70 years that she's lived there. So that's her personality. And, and she loves crazy colors of wallpaper, so there's a lot of crazy wallpaper in her house too. But that's her, and that's good, and that's a way for people to think of her, or, well, it will be when I take pictures of all of it, right? So as you're writing, think about this little girl. She thinks you're very special. She is your great-great-granddaughter. This is my prediction, my Karnak prediction, you know, whatever. She's looking at your picture and saying, you're special, I thank you because you wrote all this down. And she knows you now. And you are her favorite ancestor because she knows more about you than anybody else she's going to ever know in her tree. So good luck. It's not as hard as it sounds to get started. Once you get started, there's a lot there that you can do with it. And you can stop whenever you want. But you'll have something to share. So thank you very much for your attention. And I hope that you will at least write down a little bit of stuff. If not tonight, maybe before the end of next year. I don't want to pressure you, you know.
Time for questions?
Absolutely. If you've got questions.
You said you put all of the information into like a book.
Mm-hmm.
What is that process like? Like a physical book itself. Is that like a 3-ring binder?
Oh, no. These are published books that go on a library shelf. Yeah. And it's way easier than it sounds. Okay? Self-publishing is so easy. Each book that I've done, and one of them was almost 600 pages, so I've done little books and I've done pretty good sized books. Type them all in Word, save it as a PDF after I've read it 100 times and run spell check and all those kind of things. And you upload it to the website. Whatever company you choose to do self-publishing with, I've done some with Amazon and I've done some with Lulu. And I had a third one that I used for my client, but I can never remember what it was. Each of them have a software that lets you create the cover. So you can have a colored cover with a picture, if you want to upload a picture, whatever. That's the hardest part, is you got to write something for the back of the book. Like this is the story of, or something. Otherwise, you have a blank back of the book, and you can look in the bookstore here. There's not a book in there that's got a blank back cover. So you want to have something that you write on the outside of the book. They allow you pretty much right away. Well, the last ones I did at Lulu, and within minutes, there was a preview on my screen of exactly what the book looked like. I could flip all the pages to make sure that nothing went outside the margins and all of that. As long as I said it was okay and hit the button, I order as many copies I want, and they ship them to me. And it's very inexpensive. Most of my books are about 200 pages, 8.5 by 11, between 200 and 300 pages. And as the author, I can usually get a copy for $6. And then you also have to think about what you're going to price it at, because a lot of these are going to automatically put it into a bookstore. Not like Barnes & Noble, but they're going to put it into their online bookstore. So you get to set the price. And that's pretty exciting too, when they send you an email and say, we've just sold your book and you're getting a check. Royalty checks are really nice. Even if they're not big, they're nice to get because it's a nice surprise. Like, oh, I woke up today and I got $5, It's better than nothing. I did that yesterday. I took a pair of pants out of the closet and $5 fell out of the pocket. I was like, whoo, it's a good day. So, yeah. And they come in all sizes. If you want to self-publish, the thing you want to do is look at the different companies, because you want to know ahead of time, are you going to make like a 6 by 9? Are you going to do 8.5 by 11? Not every company does every size, and not every company does hardcover. So if you want a hardcover book, it's a little bit harder to find somebody that prints them. The one that I've done hardcover was for my client, and you had to print them in multiples of 8 because of how they printed all the pages and whatever. So it was like, well, all right, do you want 8, 16, 24? I forget how many he wanted, but it was not a big deal. He got like 2 extras or something, but he got what he wanted, a 6 by 9 hardcover book. That's all that was important. If that's what he wanted, that's what he got, right? But it's nowhere near as hard as it sounds. It's not. Now, if you want to sell a book like in the bookstores, now you're talking about, well, you got to deal with marketing and, If it's a family book, you just send an email to your whole family and say, hey, go look me up, I'm on Amazon, you know, you can get my name and see all the books I've written and whatever. But not difficult. Any other questions?
It seems like working on all of this for yourself could be helpful in the search for the rest of the family tree. Have you found that at all, like giving you ideas?
It's certainly, right, it can give you some ideas of like what you want to go find. You know, like, oh, I wonder if anybody else has ever done this in my family. And if you do write up your family history, that's when you really start to see patterns. And there are a lot of people that, you know, that's what they write a book about, is the pattern of how these 4 generations of men had the same job, more or less. You know, it changes over time because the job changes, but more or less they all, whether they intended to or not, they all followed in their father's footsteps. So I have a friend who wrote a very, very nice book exactly that way. It just talks about these 4 men. And yes, it mentions their wives and their children and things, but it doesn't go into detail. It only really talks about the men and how similar they were over time. So, you know, when you go to write your family history, there's 1,000 ways you can do it. You know, you can pick on individuals, you can write about patterns. I found in writing up my paternal grandmother, I can't believe it's been 15 years since I wrote that book, a pattern of, yeah, there were like 3 generations of the family that lived in Maine and worked in Boston in the 1800s. Like, who does that today? Well, we have rampant transit, never mind who did it in the 1800s. You know, basically they had a house in both places and they would go back and forth. And but when you start to see the patterns that, oh, generation after generation they were doing it, it brings something more to the story. So it is handy to kind of write it. And think also about, you know, well, if I'm writing down about all the places I live, do I really know all the places that my grandparents lived? I don't. I had to ask questions. I asked my mother one time, I'm like, why? I forget what census it is, but maybe 1930? My grandmother is listed as living at the hospital. I know she was a nurse, so I wasn't worried that she was a patient. She wasn't listed as a patient, but I'm like, why did she live at the hospital? And my mother had a whole big story. Whether I believe it or not is a different question, but she had a whole big story about why her mother lived at the hospital. She was a supervising nurse, and supervisors were responsible for certain things, and therefore they had this old building, and they supposedly gave my grandmother the old operating room as her apartment. My mother was like, it was huge. Okay, Mom, you were, 7. Of course it looks huge. And that's the other thing is, remember the perspective when somebody's telling you a story like that. Everybody looks tall when you're 7. They don't look so tall when you're already 6 feet, So keep it in mind. Where's the information coming from? So thank you again for being here. Thank you, John, for the taping. And good luck. You have my name and address on the handouts, so if you have questions, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to help with whatever I can, even if it's just to say, I need an expert who does X, Y, Z, whatever. I probably know of one that I can at least say, try this person and see where they send you. I say genealogy is like when we used to go to the ice cream store and get the little sample spoon, You can always get samples from people that do genealogy. Whether they give you the whole carton of ice cream is a whole different story, but you can usually get samples and little things to set you on your way. So, thank you very much.